For as long as I can remember, anxiety has been a shadow in my life. It wasn't something I fully understood at first. It wasn't until I reached my early 20s that I realized just how much of my life had been shaped by it. From the outside, everything seemed normal. I had a family that loved me, friends who supported me, and a future that was filled with possibilities. But inside, I felt like I was constantly battling an invisible force that seemed to control my every thought and action. It started small, a racing heart during presentations in class, the feeling of dread when I had to meet new people. But as time went on, it became more pronounced. The anxiety wasn't just situational anymore. It was a constant companion. It whispered in my ear during every decision I made, whether big or small. I would spend hours agonizing over the simplest things, like choosing what to wear or deciding what to say in a conversation. What if I said the wrong thing? What if they didn't like me? What if I made a fool of myself? The thoughts would spiral until I was left paralyzed, too afraid to act or speak. The most challenging part of my anxiety wasn't the fear itself, but the shame I felt for having it. I couldn't understand why I felt so different from everyone else. Why could everyone else manage their lives so easily, while I felt like I was constantly swimming against the current? I didn't want to burden anyone with my struggles, so I kept it to myself. I learned to hide my feelings behind a smile, to pretend everything was fine even when it wasn't. But the truth was, I was exhausted from pretending. I was tired of pretending that I was okay when I wasn't. I remember one particular night when everything came to a head. I was at a family gathering, surrounded by people I loved, and yet I felt completely alone. The room felt suffocating, the noise deafening, and I could feel my heart racing. My hands were shaking, my thoughts were chaotic, and I just wanted to escape. But I couldn't. I couldn't leave the party, I couldn't make an excuse, and I couldn't let anyone know what I was feeling. I was trapped in my own head, stuck in this overwhelming sense of panic. I forced myself to smile, to laugh, to act like everything was fine, but I felt like I was drowning. It was the first time I truly understood how isolating anxiety could be. It wasn't long after that I realized I couldn't keep going this way. I needed help. I needed to stop pretending that everything was okay when it wasn't. I needed to admit to myself and to others that I was struggling. But admitting it wasn't easy. I had spent years convincing myself that I was weak, that I was somehow failing because I couldn't manage my anxiety on my own. I was afraid of being judged, of being seen as fragile or incapable. I didn't want anyone to think less of me. But at the same time, I couldn't keep fighting this battle alone. I realized that admitting my anxiety didn't make me weak. It made me human. So I reached out. I started with my family, telling them how I had been feeling for years, how the anxiety had taken over my life. To my surprise, they weren't disappointed in me or upset that I hadn't said something sooner. They were supportive, loving, and understanding. They wanted to help, and they did in ways that I hadn't expected. They reassured me that I wasn't alone, that they were there for me, and that I could lean on them whenever I needed to. Reaching out for help was the first step in my journey toward healing, but it wasn't an immediate fix. It took time to understand what I was going through, to learn how to cope with the anxiety that had taken hold of my life. Therapy was incredibly helpful, as it gave me a safe space to unpack my feelings and develop tools to manage my anxiety. I also learned that anxiety wasn't something that could just be cured. It wasn't a weakness, and it wasn't a character flaw. It was something that I would need to learn to live with, but also something I could manage with the right support and self-care. I began to take small steps to regain control. I started practicing mindfulness and breathing exercises to ground myself when I felt the anxiety creeping in. I made sure to take time for myself, to recharge and give myself permission to rest without guilt. I started setting boundaries with myself and with others, recognizing that I didn't always have to be on or available for everyone. I learned to say no when I needed to, and to prioritize my mental health. One of the hardest lessons I learned was to be kind to myself. For so long, I had blamed myself for feeling the way I did. I had convinced myself that if I were stronger, smarter, or more capable, I wouldn't feel this way. but learning to be gentle with myself, to accept my anxiety without shame or guilt, was one of the most freeing things I could have done. I began to see that my anxiety didn't define me. It was a part of me, but it didn't control who I was. I was more than my fears, more than my doubts. I was a person with strengths, talents, and dreams, just like anyone else. Now, as I look back on the journey I've been on, I realize just how far I've come. It hasn't been an easy road, but it has been one of the most rewarding. I've learned that it's okay to not have all the answers, that it's okay to ask for help, and that it's okay to not be perfect. I've learned to embrace my anxiety as part of who I am, without letting it dictate my life. And I've learned to love myself, flaws and all. The most important thing I've learned through all of this is that healing is not a destination, it's a journey. It's not about getting rid of your struggles or pretending that everything is fine. It's about accepting yourself, being kind to yourself, and taking the steps you need to take to be the best version of yourself. It's about finding strength in vulnerability, in admitting when you need help, and in being patient with yourself as you grow. I'm not perfect, and I still have days when the anxiety feels overwhelming. But now, I know how to handle it. I know that I'm not alone, and I know that I'm worthy of love and support, no matter what I'm going through. I've learned that it's okay to feel uncertain, to feel vulnerable, and to ask for help. And that's the most important lesson of all.